Okay, hi everybody. I'm Sue Stacy, and I'm here today with Annette Comeau. And Annette Comeau is kind of special in terms of her background. She is an early childhood, a qualified early childhood educator. And actually, Annette used to be my student like a gazillion years ago. So Annette is an early childhood educator, but also she has a really strong arts background with a Bachelor of Fine Art and art education and design. So that's a really strong foundation in the arts. And she's also worked in the theatre, which I have to think has an influence on how you set up environments and how you see them. And we're going to talk today about environments in particular, because I've seen Annette and I have known each other for a long time. We're friends and colleagues. We've done a lot of work together. And so I've been exposed to several of Annette's environments, and they're all very aesthetically, beautiful and pleasing, but also very functional and practical. And I thought that it would be a good idea for other people to hear about that. So let's start, Annette, with first of all, welcome and thank you for doing this. You're
Yeah,
on your own time. Thanks for being here.
I'm happy to be here, Sue.
So, what influence do you think the arts have had, your arts background has had in the way that you think about and develop early childhood environments?
I think it has a huge influence. I think my design background makes me want to have things very clean and beautiful and not cluttered in terms of that. I'm very aware of what visual messages are sent by
Mhm.
environments. That visual clutter and a lot of things that people don't see. I'm always thinking, well, what message does that send? What
Mm.
does that say? And in terms of being an artist in general, we tend to always kind of are always questioning, well, why is it that way? Why are we doing it that way? Is there a better way to do it? And I think back to when you said that I was your student, and I think back to the assignment that we did about designing the classroom.
Yeah.
And my group, we had the dramatic play space. And the first thing I thought was, well, everything has to be usable in multiple ways. And so we came up with this idea because of course we couldn't build it, but we used cardboard boxes and we tried to make everything multiple use, like a square cardboard box with dots on it could be a stove, but it could be anything, right? It could be used as a block. And we just had lots and lots of different things that we didn't want to have furniture as such, right? We wanted to have this completely open-ended creative thing. So I think, and that I think comes a lot from the theater, because in the theater, when a designer is designing a stage, something for a play, often things have to have multiple uses or they get turned around. One side is one thing and the other side is something else, right? And because quick changes have to be made on stage, it's very similar in the way that children play in their play environments. It's very fluid. There's action and movement. So I think that was kind of like the first kind of exciting thing about thinking
I
about designing.
I remember that assignment so well because I remember you brought up the idea with your small group of this, using boxes. I think you stuffed them so they would be sturdy. You painted
Yes, yeah.
them white, so they were all the same. They were white and they were different sizes. And I thought that was an absolutely brilliant idea, the open-endedness of it and the multiple uses. And you also used loose parts as props. And loose parts in those days hadn't become a thing yet. We didn't have that term, but you had buttons and acorns, and instead of, pots and pans and these types of things, you had all sorts of open-ended materials. And remember the disequilibrium within your group when you brought this up, like the discussion that went into it, because you had to persuade them that this was going to be okay. And it really was okay. It was phenomenal. I
Because they
loved,
wanted like the plastic fruit
yes,
and and
yes,
vegetables and the
yeah,
plastic dishes and
exactly,
all those
exactly.
sorts of
So
things.
your design background and the stage really influenced, you think that's where that sort of started, that thinking differently about early childhood
Yeah, I,
environments?
I think so. Yeah, I
Yeah.
definitely think so. And then in my, well, it was lovely to work with you, and for you to have embraced that, because another instructor might have said, oh, well, that's not the way it's done. And I've been lucky in my career also to work with people who also had a similar vision, right, for things. And I think specifically, so after I graduated, it wasn't long before I ended up at Peter Green Hall Children's Center. And then if people, that's a center here in Halifax that embraced the Reggio Emilia approach back in the 90s, right? And I went there as a student doing a practicum, and they were in the middle of the doll project. And so I was there right on on the ground floor with them, exploring that whole emergent curriculum idea. And it was really interesting for me because some of the things that I had been taught in early childhood, the idea of small groups and that all children had to stay for the whole time, and the adult was choosing a lot of the activities for the children, didn't make sense to me. Like I didn't, it's like, why is this like that? It doesn't make sense. It's not the way the children are. So when I went to Peter Green Hall, it was like, yes, this is
A good
exciting.
fit. Yeah.
This is amazing. So then I kind of found my kind of ECE soulmate, Bobby Lynn Keating,
Mhm.
and then I went to work at Peter Green Hall, and very interestingly, we had an opportunity came our way. So we were in the junior room, but the educators in the senior preschool room left. And so we were asked to move over and take over that classroom. And basically, it wasn't the classroom wasn't functioning well. And so we just kind of had this clean slate. Like we just cleaned everything. We spent weekends in there cleaning out the cupboards and organizing the materials. And we thought about how are the children using this space? What are they doing? Basically almost every minute of their day. What do they need when they come in? What do they need when they're having lunch? What do they need to be successful in their play? And so we ended up doing all kinds of things, even just thinking about how they were going to brush their teeth and how they were going to wait to brush their teeth and what they were going to be doing. And that really, so all of the design for that room came from the idea of how it was going to support the children at
And
any
that's a
given.
really different way of approaching the design of a classroom because typically, from what I've seen in the past, maybe a little less so now in the present, but in the past, I would go into classrooms that had been set up in, before the educators really knew the children. The classrooms were set up sort of the way classrooms used to be. Used to, that's just the way you set up a classroom. There's this area, there's that area, and these things are in it. So to flip that and to think about the classroom in terms of what are the children going to do here? What do they want to do here? What do they need? Especially looking at routines, that's a very different way makes total sense, but a very different way for the time of looking at how classrooms should be designed. Makes perfect sense to me.
Exactly. And
Yeah,
we thought a lot about what we valued.
yeah,
So we valued the idea that educators would sit with children and eat in a family style way.
yeah,
And that was pretty new also in the 90s.
yeah.
So we asked that we would, that lunch would come in separate serving bowls. We actually had like scraping containers and trays. So we really felt we noticed that educators were always like jumping up and running around and not eating with the children because things weren't all prepared. So we basically, had our lunch tables and all of the equipment that would come in to support that so that the educator could sit with the children and relax. And then when it came time to transition to the bathroom or to nap, well, what are children going to do? Where are they going to go? So we came up with this idea of these beautiful little trays, activity trays that would come and on the tables. And we actually had a shelf that we designed for these trays to live in. And each morning, children would decide, well, what are we going to put on our trays for lunchtime? Little Lego men, little blocks, whatever. And we came with this idea so that a child could have an activity to work at the table. They could go to the bathroom, brush their teeth, and come back to the same materials. So children weren't worried about someone's going to take my stuff when I go, right? And so it worked. And then, of course, the area that we designed for the trays had lots of beautiful loose parts in jars stored above so that the children had the things to choose from. So, like I say, a lot of those things. And then we thought about, because we were working with documentation, that we didn't have a lot of wall space. So what we designed were these two basically pieces of furniture that would accommodate documentation. And they were designed very,
They're still there.
they're still
They're
there,
still there. Yeah.
designed very specifically to hold the binders, the portfolios. They were designed to hold the ongoing documentation books, and they had sort of little racks at the top for sculpture and places for documentation to be hung because we didn't have much wall space for that.
What you're describing to me in terms of your process and thinking of the environment as the third teacher or the third caregiver, and the environment is providing care in terms of what as another educator. This reminds me very much of a chapter I've just read in the book that's just come out of Reggio Emilia a little while ago, The Role of the Pedagogista. It's a very interesting, very dense and complex book, and I'm fascinated by it. And one of the chapters is about just what you're describing. You were ahead of your time. It was the chapter is about children setting the table, 5-year-olds setting the table for lunch, and all that that entails. And the educators, the team, went into deep, deep detail, thinking about, in discussion with their pedagogista, about what does a child have to understand in order to set a table with a tablecloth and flowers in the middle and all the utensils and the plates and the serving dishes. What do they have to understand? And how can they teach that, the children themselves? How can they teach it to younger children? It's a fascinating chapter, but it's very much the same type of process you're thinking about, is using the environment to support not only learning in the typical way that we think of learning, but the environment to support how we get through the day and what children actually do, instead of the traditional stereotypical classroom. And your classrooms, the places in which you've worked over the years, have always been different than the traditional. So right now, for instance, you're working in a place where you went in, and I think it's fair to say that it was fairly traditional in its setup. But you've developed an atelier, a little studio. You've carved out the space. Can you tell me a little bit about your thinking behind wanting to get that? You wanted it so badly. I remember you when you first started working there, you wanted to get that atelier space up and running. How did that happen for you, and what was your thinking behind that?
Well, in every space that I've worked in, I've always carved out an atelier
Yeah.
because I think that they're really important spaces for children. First, so that small groups of children can move out of the larger classroom and focus on things that they're working on. And that can be anything, music, puppetry, art. Um, but also because the atelier is also, I think it kind of holds wonder, the atelier, in that all of the ateliers that we've had have had shelving that has things in jars and in containers so that we collect all of these loose parts and things, ribbons, scraps, fabrics, papers, so that the children come to know that this is a place where they can go find the things for their ideas, right? And these are where the tools are. This is where I can, if I'm thinking about something that I'm making and say I need wool, well, I can go in and find all kinds of different wool there. But then I may also find something that inspires me. So generally, we go with the children and we say, okay, well, what do you think we need? And then they go in and they look, and then we pick out the things that we want. Sometimes we're doing it in the atelier, but I find a lot of this happens where they're bringing it back to the classroom because they're working on something in block area or an art area, and they're doing something straight from their own idea, and they need the support to do this. And but like I say, the atelier also works from the educator's point of view in that beautiful things can be set up there, like light and shadow, different, art experiences, working with clay, where you can go work with clay and be muddy and leave your work there to get leather hard and then come back to it, right? So for me, the atelier is it's like the center of what we do. And in my current situation, because the educators had not really been exposed to emergent curriculum, it had been pretty traditional, and there was, coloring sheets and things like that there. It took me a while. So I made the atelier and I worked in it, but it took me a while, or it took them a while, the educators a while, to feel comfortable to go in on their own. And now we have a sign up sheet
Oh, wonderful.
because because sometimes two people will be thinking they want to use the atelier, and so now, we kind of have to have it so everybody kind of knows who's
Yeah.
using
Mm.
using it, because before it kind of sat empty and I would, like, try to get people to come in with me and do things. But now, like I say, now we have a sign up sheet because it's used pretty
That's
much
encouraging. That's really
every day,
encouraging. Yeah.
because the teachers came, it took a while for them to appreciate um, how children behave differently in smaller groups.
Mm.
There is a tendency in early childhood education to kind of like herd the masses through,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
And that without the support of your co-teacher, how are you going to cope with these children, right? Whereas they've become much more comfortable in themselves as educators to go into this space and work. And they also know that, they just need to open the door and yell if they need help. But,
Yes. Mm.
it's,
It's, I like, just following up on what you said about children in small groups. I remember when I was working directly with children, it was a small lab school space, and there was only 12 children, half-day program. This was at St. Matthew's Church in Halifax. 12 children. I was the only qualified educator with students with me, student educators with me. And small group time was the children's favorite part of the day. It was, I remember watching a child working with materials, and I had the video running. It was, an old video camera back in those days. And she paused and she said, "Oh, I love small group time." And just so, to herself, just, "I love small group time."
Mm,
And I said, "Why, Martha? Why do you love small group time? What do you like?" And she said, "It's just so peaceful and I can think." He said, "This is
yeah,
a 4-year-old. I can
yeah.
think away from the hubbub,
Hmm.
I think what she meant was sort of away from the hustle and bustle, which she also enjoyed, during play. But that small group time in a separate little room, that was special to her. And I can understand that. How can
Hmm.
you have creative thoughts and ideas and follow them up when there's all this sort of stimulation around you? It can be hard for some children. So
Yeah.
I think the atelier, and many people who are listening to us will say, well, we don't have an atelier space. Most of us didn't have an atelier space in our practices, unless we're very fortunate and we carved it out. But in Reggio Emilia, they do have atelier spaces. They have an atelier in every school, but they also have the mini atelier in their classrooms. It's just a corner of the classroom. That's what it is. It's the corner of the classroom with the
Yes.
materials. And I've seen you do that. You did that at Peter Green Hall too.
Well, yes, we
Mhm.
did. So that
Yeah.
was that was really big. But getting back to the atelier, also when the group of children leave a classroom to go to the atelier, the children that are left behind, the room is also much calmer
Yes,
and they
yes,
have more space to work. So really it benefits both
yes.
groups.
Yeah. And they
But
know that the materials are there. And once they've been in the atelier and worked, they would know what's there. And so when they're in the big playroom, they know what's available to go get.
yes,
I
exactly.
assume. Yeah.
But also, yes, I think everybody enjoys that extra room that they
Hmm.
have for
Yeah.
working. But in terms of ateliers, yes, things have been carved out, right? At Peter Green Hall, Barb gave up her office for the
Yes.
atelier and
Yes.
moved it basically into a closet.
Yes.
Um, and then at here at the Mount, basically I took an office and
Yeah.
people had to work in
In a
other
different
places
space.
in
Yeah.
order
Yeah.
for us to have the atelier. And at Jubilee Road, we had ateliers in the rooms. Now, actually, Jubilee, we had our studio downstairs.
Yes.
But one of the things I really love, and this is such a simple thing, those IKEA shelves, the ones that are just the block, they're
Yes.
sturdy, they have transparency. You can put things in, using one of those IKEA shelves as a wall is like an instant way to create an
Yes.
atelier because you've created that protective space, but you also have the space where you can put things and display things. And yeah, so every classroom has to have a good art space. Like at Peter Green Hall, for instance, we also designed another shelf because we had this idea that we wanted all the paper to have a place, but we also had this idea that if we put a light behind the paint bottles, it would look really interesting. It didn't work out as well as we had hoped it, but that shelf is still there, and it still is a dedicated shelf for all the beautiful little paint jars that, or other art materials that can be put out, right?
It saddens me when I go into some classrooms, I'm working with various kinds of classrooms and institutions over the years. And when it seems almost as if art areas, let's not even call them ateliers, but even art areas seem to be sort of disappearing. It seems to be less of a priority than it used to be. Sometimes I go into classrooms and there's not even an easel. And that really bothers me that there's not even that, that I would think that would be, the minimum. And I wonder why that is, why early childhood classrooms, some, not all, but some, are getting away from the arts. I mean, we don't have to be arts based, but art is a powerful language. Um, and
Yes.
children have to have access to materials have agents, all materials have agency, all materials have an effect on the child and on all humans and how we behave with the materials. But art materials are another language, and it's another language for children to use. So why wouldn't we have them? Um,
I th- I think a, I think a lot of it has to do with because we've been thinking a lot lately about the differences in children and their greater social and emotional needs since the pandemic.
yes.
And we're finding that a lot of the educators are so overwhelmed with the social and emotional needs of the children and getting through to the end of the day that some of these things seem overwhelming to them.
Mhm.
So, art, if you have an art setup, you have to work with the children to understand that the paint and the different materials stay in a certain area and are worked with in a certain way, that maybe to be respectful of our clothing that we wear smocks. And that's a lot of work for educators, getting
Yeah.
children to put on smocks and taking them off. And
Somebody has to be in that area,
that's
somebody
right.
has
That
to be
that's the other. Someone
present.
has to stay there,
Yes,
but they
yeah,
also have to value the work that goes on there,
yes,
right? And
yeah.
it's messy.
Yeah.
it's messy.
Yeah.
And it's important that it be messy, but it's a controlled mess. But I sometimes I feel that educators feel like they can't cope with that mess.
Mm.
You see it a lot in music as well, because children don't have musical instruments. The musical instruments are generally on a high shelf because
Mhm.
they're noisy, and as soon as children get them out, they mistreat them, and they're just like banging. So I'm going through the same process with my people now about music.
Yeah.
Now they're all converts with the art
Yes.
materials, but
Yes.
music is so I had a student who was doing a music practicum, so she played the guitar, and we have a lot of beautiful instruments, and we're trying to establish music areas in each room. At Jubilee Road, we had a beautiful music area that always had a keyboard in it, and the volume was kept down. And we also had instruments, real instruments, small ones that were down low, and some like a beautiful guitar that children could have taken down. But
Remember
we talked,
the big drums that
yes,
that
yep.
were there.
And
Yeah.
but we talked to the children about that these instruments were not toys, and
Hmm.
that they were worked with in a certain way. And over time, we have tone bells, we had a lot of different things. Over time, the children were able to go to that area and work with these instruments in the way that they should be worked with, and they're listening. And so, we by the end, like I had a little girl come to me, and she's doing this little song, Little Ballerina Had a Pretty Dress, on the keyboard. And she says to me, Annette, you need to write down the notes now for this so that we can keep this. And so it was and we had another little guy who loved to get the guitar down, and we always kept it in tune. And it became a really big part of what we did. We also, this is we had a little girl who was interested in ballet, and she wanted ballet music. And so we listened to the Nutcracker and Swan Lake, and they danced. And I had 2-year-olds who could identify the difference between Swan Lake and the Nutcracker, and also the different seasons in Vivaldi's The Four Seasons, because we played this stuff and it was just part of what
Yeah.
we did. So now at the Mount, very slowly we're working. So now I have a keyboard in the classroom, and working with, not pounding on the keys and doing that. And then we're going to be we have pictures posted of the children using some of the instruments with our students, and then eventually add more instruments in. But it's a very slow process, and I think sometimes the key when you have an idea for changing your environment or setting up an area, I think educators get really excited and they want to do it all at once. And what happens is they put all of these beautiful materials there, and the children don't know how to use them.
Mhm.
And then they use them inappropriately, and the educators get kind of discouraged and kind
Mhm.
of take it away. So we always go with the idea that children need time. As another example, uh, at MSVU, when I went there, I was told that we can't have real plants in the toddler room because they just knock them down. So I got another educator to join us, and of course, she had gone through this process. So she started out with vases of flowers. So we would get real flowers just in water in a vase, and she set it up beautifully on a shelf. And she talked to the children about that. And this is, we can look at them, they're beautiful. When they start to wilt, we can take them down, we can take them apart, we can do whatever. And basically, she worked with the children with the idea that not everything gets there are things that you can throw, and we have plenty of those
Mhm.
things, and there are
Mhm.
ways that you can use the environment to roll and to do all these different things. But these are beautiful things that we need to have in our space. And so she did that. And then as they worked with the flowers in the vase, then she brought in plants. Now, occasionally today, on their tops of their shelves are always beautiful landscapes, and their shelves are just have wonderful things in them. The things on the shelves the children can all access and use. Even the things on top of the shelves the children can access and use, but they understand that these are special things that need to be handled more gently, right?
Well, Montessori would have loved that because,
Yeah,
Montessori way back was using glass and china with young
yes,
children because she trusted them that they could,
yes,
if they knew how to handle these things, these delicate things, they could manage them, and they did.
yes,
So a Montessori environment would support that, treating things with respect and very aesthetically beautiful, um, but accessible, that the children can use them, but they know
yeah.
how. And I remember you doing that same thing with a fountain in a toddler
Oh, yes,
toddler,
that's
cla
right.
toddler classroom at Jubilee Road, how you taught children that the fountain is beautiful and it's very interesting, but you had sort of like a little meeting with them and you said, we have this other fountain that you can take apart and see how it works. But this fountain is for looking at and listening to. It's very beautiful. We're just going to leave it here on the shelf. And you explained the whole process to them, but you gave them an alternate way to explore it. Is that
Yes,
correct?
because
Is that, yeah?
we knew that they would be interested in the
Yeah,
pumping and the
yeah,
flow of water and the wet rocks and
yeah,
everything.
yeah,
So we just said, okay, well, this is pumping, this is flowing, these are wet rocks. You can touch and do this all you want.
yes,
And initially, honestly, Sue, when we first got the fountain and plugged it in, we sat at a table and we let them touch it and
yeah,
explore it and do everything said
yeah,
out, and then we put it up and said, okay, this is where the fountain lives and this is how we treat the fountain. And we ended up doing things like, oh, we pumped water around the room and we got up on a ladder and poured water from heights. It turned into this amazing project. We ended up visiting fountains in the public gardens. Like it just
very,
turned into a
very
whole
much
project.
very much inquiry based
Exactly.
through
But
the
the other thing that
environment.
happened was when younger children came, or other children came to the classroom who hadn't gone through the whole fountain process, the other children would immediately, because they would want to play with the fountain, the other children would immediately instruct them on how to, no, well, you don't touch the rocks in the fountain, and we
Yes.
have water play over here. And so the fountain really was, yeah, it really was a really lovely part of our environment.
Yeah.
Um, and that goes to the idea of finding things that aren't traditionally in a early childhood environment. And I feel really strongly that there needs to be different types of furniture, like and lighting. And at Jubilee Road, we the children were it was, we didn't have a lot of space, and so we knew that they kind of wanted like a boat, like something to get in and something to do things in. And we were kind of looking around on like Kijiji, and we saw that someone had for free this kid's bed, like a captain's bed that had like rails around it, and it was all home built, and it was for free. And we thought this would be really neat. This is kind of like a boat. This is really sturdy. You can get up in it. We can put stuff in it. We can use it in different ways. And so we went and got it and brought it into the classroom, and that kind of defined our dramatic play area. Like
Yeah.
that boat, fort, it was just all kinds
And
of things at
we
different
live in an
times.
area of boats. This is where
Yeah,
the children, this is what
yeah,
they see in their lives.
yeah,
They pass them by every day on the harbor, so this is where they're situated culturally. So that makes perfect sense that they would
yeah.
relate to that, and ask for it. And I mean, every place that you've worked with, not necessarily at, but with as a consultant. I remember you being on the South Shore at Small World, and the classrooms there began to change and reflect the children's outside environment, their cultural environment. And there was always non-traditional furniture
Yes.
in those classrooms. And so they didn't
For
look like
example,
classrooms, they looked like living spaces,
they do. They do.
Yes,
And
yeah,
they did a lot of work looking for materials in the environment. Like they have in in the area where they get dressed this beautiful long church bench, like antique church bench against the
yes,
wall. And they have in the atelier, they have like an antique wooden ladder, that hangs from the ceiling that allows you to put things on, art things on to hang, but it just looks beautiful even if there's
Yes,
nothing hanging on it. So
yes,
it has to do with things that tell the children where they are,
yes.
right?
This is
And
this
that they're
is
not
who
in
I
an
am.
institution,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. We don't look the same as the childcare center, in the next town over. We're different. We all have our own environment that we can relate to. We're quickly running out of time, and I knew this would happen because there's so many directions we could go with this. But I wondered if we could just address the idea of complexity. You and I have talked about this before, complexity within simplicity. For example, I remember an invitation. I think we used it when we were working on the Nova Scotia framework, and we showed a photograph of this. It was a tray with blue aquarium gravel in the bottom, and it had three red cars and a couple of little arched wooden blocks. And that was it. And so simple to look at. But here again, we see the complexity of what you can do with that. There's so much that you could do with that. And all three cars were red. So there wasn't any squabbling about who gets the red car, because that was very popular. But everybody could use a red car. But if you think about the textures, the smoothness of the arches, the texture of the gravel, the movement of the cars on the arch blocks. I mean, there was so much you could do with that simple invitation. But I think in our environments, children need challenge. They crave challenge. They love challenge. But also, we can set up a very simple environment that contains those challenges, that we can do both. And probably your stage management materials expertise has enabled you to think about complexity within simplicity. The two are not mutually exclusive. Um,
Well,
I've seen some really interesting invitations in your environments.
well, the thing is it started quite a while ago. It was at Jubilee Road where I worked with an educator, and we wondered, would the children's play change if we were more intentional about how we offered materials? And so we kind of started a project for ourselves, and we would create these things. And we generally would take a picture of it before we started, and then we would take pictures as the children were doing it. And excuse me, often there was an aesthetic component to what we did, and there was a sense of underlying order, um, but it was a way of helping the children see more deeply. So in that situation with the red cars on the blue stones, so we could have easily put a bunch of rocks in a bin and put any number of cars and put some blocks in, and it would have looked very chaotic visually. It would have done the same, it would have had the same play value, and that children would have had rocks and cars and blocks. But the arches and the red cars and the blue stones created an aesthetic experience. The the way that the blue stones vibrated visually with the red cars was really important. It also made you consider, what are these cars? Oh wow, they look, I can look at this car rather than just seeing it as a car to roll around. And also with the arches as well. And so we wouldn't have stopped children from adding more cars to that as it went along, but we wanted them to have that initial experience with that, which was really important. And often, for example, we would have just trying to think of something. Oh, we might set up an activity where everything was white.
Yes.
There would be lots of different textures, lots of different containers, little things to dramatic play with, but everything was white or everything was black. And so what happens is the child has an aesthetic experience with that. I think it makes them see what they're playing with in a different way and
Absolutely.
consider it in a different way.
Yeah.
And I'll give you an example of something that just happened just recently at MSVU. One of my educators was working with a group of toddlers, and she was working with black and white. And she was offering them different black and white materials over many days, feathers, clay, toys, lots and lots of black and white experience. And on one day, she offered them a piece of black paper, a piece of white paper, and a jar of black paint and a jar of white paint with brushes in each one. And it was laid out on these beautiful trays. And these 18-month-olds and 2-year-olds came over to that activity with such a sense of calm and focus. It was incredible. We were just like, woo. Um, and literally they would, you know how children often will mix paint together or do the jars? No, they would take the black paint out and they tried it on the black paper, tried it on the white paper, did the white and did it and kind of, and their sense of focus just overwhelmed us. And we thought, you know, they've been thinking about black and white. They've been working with black and white. And now this was a way for them to really focus on it in a way. And it was really, really interesting. And I think because the materials had been offered over many days,
Yeah.
but also because they were offered in a very zen, I don't know if that's the right word, but beautiful, calm, holistic way, the children absolutely picked up on it. And it was very different from any of the other painting experiences that we have had with them. I do find that children aren't given enough credit for their understanding of beautiful music and beautiful images. So I, as a fine artist, am always bringing in
Mm.
um, art reproductions and different things based on what children are doing at any particular time. And we look at that. We look at that closely, right?
And anyone can do that. They don't have to have an arts background to bring in the arts
No,
into the
no.
environment and expose children to them.
No, you can
What?
print it out online.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
can get calendars. I use a lot of old calendars
yeah.
that have art things in them. Um,
When you were talking about, the children's approach to black and white at a very young age, it reminds me of slow pedagogy, slow pedagogy practices that give children deep backgrounds before they move on to new things. And to be immersed in thinking about black and white materials before they paint, and having, curated materials in these small group offerings that are really thoughtfully put together, very intentional. That deep background, I'm sure, affected the way they approached paint. They had all this information about black and white before they even started to paint. And it's totally up to them what they do with the paint. Nobody's going to stop them from doing anything, but just to observe that and to see how different it is when they've had exposure before.
yeah, it was one of those kind of aha moments
Yeah.
for the educators because and for this educator in particular because she was new working with children who were like under 2.
Mhm.
And so, she had been working along and kind of, trying to think of them as capable and competent as she could, but then understanding how truly capable and competent
Yeah.
they
This is
are.
just a demonstration of how much they are taking in.
Yes.
And we have to trust that.
And
Yeah.
children love complexity.
Yes.
That's why, you get these children who can rhyme off all the dinosaur names because they
Yeah.
love complexity.
Yeah.
And like we've had things where I've had children who they've gotten interested with the using those lovely magnetiles, wanting to know what they were called, wanting to know what this geometric solid was called. And then, we ended up with this whole project about geometric solids. The teachers had to
Mhm.
look up what they were called. We
Mhm.
built this giant tetrahedron in our classroom with PVC pipe that they could get in. It was a big construction project. Um, and I had this little guy, the same little boy, we're having snack and we have crackers and wow butter, and he says, Annette, we can make a cube. And I'm like, yes, we can. We can make a cube. And then the same little child I'm changing his diaper on the change table, and he puts his fingers up like this and he goes, Annette, I made a tetrahedron. Right? And
Love it.
this guy is
Love
not
it.
even 3 years old.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
just going with these things. And I really feel like environments can be beautiful, but it's also how the educators are watching and bringing these rich materials into the environment and watching children's cues for
Mhm.
these things
And
and building
listening
complexity.
and listening to what they
Yeah.
say as they're exposed to these materials, and just taking note, noticing what they say and how they handle them and what they understand about them. Because as you say, children understand way more than we give them credit for,
And I think they
usually.
get excited. I think they get
Yes.
excited by the fact that we um, appreciate what they're thinking. Like, the building of that big tetrahedron was huge, and they worked on it with their hard hats, and we did all that stuff. And it was big. Like they were 8 feet long pieces of PVC pipe. And so we could almost all get inside it, right? It was, and I think that the the we talk about the environment as the third teacher, but also the teacher's willingness to engage with the children's ideas and value the children's ideas, I think is the main thing,
Yeah. To
and
be
then
to be prepared to go there,
yeah, exactly.
wherever the children are going. They're very good at that in Virgin Amelia. They will take risks in thinking, risks with their own thinking to appreciate the children's thinking, and they will go there no matter
Yeah.
what the children think of. They will find a way to work with that,
Yeah.
and to go
Like,
there.
so imagine you're a child and you come in and there's a big tetrahedron in the middle of your room. Or, when we were doing the ballet, we cleaned out a whole area of the classroom and put up a ballet bar, and it was just ballet, and we projected on the wall like ballet dancers dancing in these ballets, and the children danced amongst the shadows, and
It's so
so thinking
rich.
about the changing the whole environment to accommodate these big
Yeah,
ideas, right?
yeah,
Pumping water around the
yeah,
room, right?
yeah,
It's
yeah.
just, yeah. And
It's
that's
it
it's
it may feel risky to educators, but once you've done that a couple of times as a team, supporting each other, once you've done that a couple of times, I think you come to appreciate how dynamic it is and how passion it brings passion back to our work when we use the environment like that and just go
yes.
there with the kids and change the environment completely to accommodate ballet or whatever needs to be accommodated. It's exciting work. It's really exciting.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
and if I have one last piece of advice to give people about their environments is think about the tables and chairs. For most environments, the tables and chairs overpower everything.
Hmm.
And most of the time, children are only really needing those tables and chairs for a very short period of the day when they're having snack and lunch.
Yes.
And if you think about the number of minutes in the day that all of those chairs and tables are really required, it's a very small percentage of the day, but yet we seem to be held captive by these chairs and tables. And I've
Yes.
been doing a lot of thinking about changing and designing multi-purpose furniture and things like that. But I think people need to think about how can we move these? Do we need them in our room all the time? Can we eat
Hmm.
somewhere else? Can
Hmm.
and because I do find that is the dominant piece of,
It's what we see when we
yep,
enter a classroom. We see all these chairs
yeah.
and tables. So how else could we use them? What
Yeah.
else could we do?
And it
Well,
goes back to
that's
the whole school thing of
yes,
desks, right?
yes,
And
yes.
so we do
Yeah.
that. But anyway, that would be my last piece of advice is
Okay.
really don't think about how you can get rid of that or move that
Yeah.
stuff to open up your space.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Obviously, we need to have more conversations about this.
Yes, yes. That was
But we'll
exciting.
but
Yeah.
we'll end there for today. And
All right.
I think we've got some follow-up stuff to do.
Yes.
So thank you for being here again, and we'll talk again and we'll follow up on this. Thanks, Annette.
All right. Thanks, Sue.